All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another episode with us. And today I have here again with us Dr. Mercola, which you guys don't know how much I admire, and I'm very fond and a big fan of Dr. Mercola, legendary doctor in the functional medicine space and just bringing light and truth to the world. So grateful to have you here today, Dr. Mercola, with us, although to discuss a funny topic and a series of events, but
Not funny. It's an important topic that can radically improve the listener's strategy to optimize their longevity and health.
True, absolutely. And
That's not a funny. That's important.
yes. So I don't know how to break this to you guys, but so Dr. Mercola and we were at an event together, the Biohacking Conference, Dave Asprey's Biohacking Conference, about what, a month ago?
It was the third week of June, 21st, 22nd.
And somebody had the idea, well, not somebody, a colleague of ours, to bring a arm wrestling table to the conference last
Professional arm wrestling table, the legitimate, the real deal table that they use in the events. Tyler is a world-class arm wrestler. He won 4th and 5th in Orlando 2 years ago at the International World Arm Wrestling Contest. Fourth, he had two titles, 4th and 5th, because they do one with each arm.
Right. Yeah. I saw that. And I had never seen a live professional arm wrestling table. I'm sitting over there by the hyperbarics, and a friend of mine, she's like, Dr. Deeg, come try to arm wrestle. I'm sure you could beat all these guys. And I was like, I'm sure, why not? So, I went against a few people and so forth. And lo and behold, a few minutes later, I'm standing next to Dr. Mercola. And I walk up to Dr. Mercola and I said, I'll arm wrestle you. And he said, okay, sure. So, should we show them the video?
Sure. Yeah.
Here's the video. This is what happened. Yeah, there you go. Look at this. I mean, and this is when I was cheating. Dr. Mercola didn't even move off his pad.
Get primal.
DQ'd, because if your elbow goes off the pad.
Look at that. Look at this. This is where I'm like, whoa. I like this. I honestly, I was like, no. I'm like, yeah, that's when I was like, okay, let's get this over with. And I'm like, uh-oh.
Come on, Dr. D.
You look pretty good too.
Yeah, thanks. I feel good.
No, but even when we got off, I mean, you weren't huffing and puffing, and
No, there's a reason for that. That's why I wanted.
And now I want to show people the shape that I'm in right now. If you guys can put up the picture that I just sent. This is a recent picture I just took, Dr. Mercola. Check this out. That's me right now, okay? That's me. I'm in heck of a good shape. And I never thought I would lose. Okay? You guys could take that off. Thanks. I'm not trying to be arrogant here. I'm just trying to say I train really hard. Yeah, I'm not trying to be arrogant.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to say, so when I felt Dr. Mercola's strength, and now all jokes aside, we're I was like, wait, something's not normal. And there's a bit of a gap in age, right? 30 years, exactly.
30 years. It's nothing.
30 years. So number one, I want to learn all the tips and tricks that I can to get to the stage in life that Dr. Mercola is in, the same or better. And and I'd love for him to share today, some of his lifestyle habits and so forth, and whatever comes to mind, to really explain, like, how was this possible? Like, I'm a really strong guy. I trained jujitsu. Even today I went to jujitsu before work and lifted and all this stuff, and then a 68-year-old man, which I never expected in my wildest dreams.
Yes.
To just yank my arm like that. And I was like, okay, so So yeah, if we can go a little bit into it, Dr. Mercola, number one, did you expect to beat me?
I thought I probably wasn't going to just because of the age difference, but I said, why not? Give it a try. What I got to lose?
Yeah. I kind of saw that in your face because when I said, let's do an arm wrestle, you looked at me and I was like, what is he going to say? And you're like, all right. So that's why I asked that question.
Yeah. I don't know. That was the first time I ever arm wrestled, and with a legit arm wrestling table, and someone, a certified referee to to guide you through the process. So you want to know why I believe it is now, and I ran my theory by Tyler, who is the world-class arm wrestler and also a really smart scientist, researcher, top-notch. He is a bright guy. He's a professor of exercise physiology, so he knows his science. So he was also really the initial founder and promoter of molecular hydrogen. So I could say it's because I do molecular hydrogen. No, that doesn't hurt. But I think there's two primary reasons. One is that I do a form of exercise that generically is called blood flow restriction training, BFR for short.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that almost all BFR done in this country is wrong. It's incorrect. It's far less than optimal. BFR was developed in Japan 50 years ago by a guy named Professor Sato, and it only came to the United States this century, early 2000s, and really has only been adopted for maybe the last 14, 15 years. So I first heard about it at the Biohacking conference in 2017. So I've been doing it for 6 years. I've been doing it pretty consistently, most days of the week for 6 years. So, and I think that's one of probably the biggest reason why I was able to beat you. So what the heck is BFR? Now, I beat you in arm wrestling. That doesn't mean I beat you in a street fight. I'm sure you'd rip me apart with your jujitsu training. I have great respect for jujitsu. It is clearly one of the leading, if not the best, self-defense martial arts that you can participate in. So, but the ability to win at arm wrestling is a sign, a barometer of your overall strength and metabolic health, which so it's not your ability to defeat someone in the street fight. So, what does blood flow restriction do? It's basically, let me tell you the science of it. There's two types. One is you can just buy a $15 band on Amazon, and it's like a tourniquet, but you don't want it that tight where it completely obstructs the blood flow. You want at least enough arterial blood flowing through, but the venous return to the heart is blocked, so the metabolic byproducts build up during the exercise. But if you just have a band on, it's not as good as doing the original KAATSU, which is KAATSU. That is a Japanese word for gentle pressure. Is it gentle or additional pressure? I'm sorry, gentle, additional pressure. Mm. So the actual KAATSU device is a compressor. Initially, when it first came out, it was a $25,000 piece of equipment, $25,000. And then it went down. When I bought it, it was down to $2,500. Now they're under 1,000, which is phenomenal. It's about the size of a pack of cigarettes. Relatively lightweight, and you can easily wear it. So the device is an air compressor, and it has electronics in it that essentially attaches to a cuff, or that you can put two cuffs, either around your arms, upper arms, right on the proximal deltoid, or on the inner thigh, right where you would wear a bikini or your shorts. You don't wear them together. It's one set or the other. So when it's on, the pump will pump pressure into the cuff, inflate it for 30 seconds. And then it shuts off and it deflates for 5, reinflates for another 30 seconds at a little higher pressure. And it does this for a cycle of 8. And you can set the intensity of the pressure that you want on there to the point where it's customized for you. And you do that ideally with some type of resistance training. And this is one of the single best interventions that a person over certainly 50, but maybe as low as 40, and absolutely 60, 70, 80 would be suited for, because almost everyone needs resistance training. especially as you age, because you're going to develop sarcopenia, which leads to frailty and premature death. So the benefit of using KAATSU is that you're going to do the exercise, the resistance exercises, but you're not going to do one rep max. And that is the most weight that you could possibly lift one time only. If you could lift it twice, it's not a 1 rep max. If you can't lift it at all, it's not 1 rep max. But you find that weight, and the weight that you're going to go with KAATSU is about 70% lower. 70% lower. So your risk of getting injuries, which is a huge issue with almost everyone training, because they almost invariably, you've been training long enough, you know, I'm sure you got injuries, and almost everyone you see gets injuries. Usually it's due to the connective tissue injuries because you're not eating enough collagen, the amino acids in collagen, or specifically connective, more broadly rather, connective tissue, because it could be gelatin would be another way to do it, or just get the connective tissue in animal meat. But because a third of our protein in our body is collagen, connective tissue, hair, skin, nails, ligaments, and tendons. So if you don't have the raw material, and the amino acid concentration in collagen is completely different. I mean, radically different than the amino acid concentration in meats. So if you're not getting those amino acids, specifically like glycine, proline, hydroxyproline, alanine, and if you're not getting those, you can't build collagen. So you'll get weak connective tissue, weak ligaments, weak tendons, and that's why people get injured when they're doing the training, because they don't have enough collagen. That's not commonly appreciated. But even if you had enough, you still can get injured because you're lifting too heavy, or your form is incorrect. So the beauty of KAATSU is that you're going 70% less, and the likelihood of you getting injured at that weight is really, really low. So it almost eliminates the risk of injury, which is cool. Now, the price you pay for that 70% lower, is you got to increase the reps. So instead of doing 10, 12, 15, maybe you're doing 30 reps for a set. Do 30 reps, the weight was too heavy. If you can do like 50, it was too light. The sweet spot. The sweet spot, as I said, is typically 70% of your 1 rep max. Maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 60, somewhere in that range. And you can fine tune it. And then you wait, you don't wait 2-3 minutes between sets, you wait 10 seconds. And then the next set is 20. Then you wait another 10 seconds, third set is 15, and the last set is like 10. And ideally, you want to get to the point where you're close to failure. So if you can only do 8 the last set, great. If you can, if you can do 5, maybe it was a little bit too heavy. So you do that, and you basically essentially fake out your body. You fool it into believing that you're lifting a much, much heavier weight. And the reason it's able to accomplish such enormous benefits metabolically into your muscle tissue and really facilitate incredible muscle growth. I could show, I'm pretty similar to the picture you showed, and I'm at 68. And I'm 69 now. I actually had a birthday since we last met.
Oh, happy birthday. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I've gained about 20 pounds of muscle mass in my 60s, which is crazy. Shouldn't happen. I mean, typically that does not happen as you get older. And I'll tell you the reason it doesn't. There's a specific physiological reason. One of the primary ways you're able to grow muscle is the type 2 satellite cells in your muscle, also called stem cells. And for the type 2 fibers, there's a type 1 muscle fiber and type 2. Type 1 is the slow, type 2 is the fast twitch fibers. The types 1 are the slow ones, and they typically use mitochondria. That's why they're red fibers, because and when you're using the mitochondria to generate energy in the form of ATP, it's a relatively slow process. It's the most efficient, incredibly efficient. You'll get the maximum amount of ATP you can for a molecule of glucose, like 36 to 38, but it doesn't generate it quickly. It takes a while. So the alternative you have is using the fast twitch fibers, and they're called glycolytic fibers, means they use glucose in the glycolytic path. And actually, I wanted to share a slide with you. Let me see.
Oh, cool! Absolutely.
Because it's really important. Okay, so this helps understand a lot easier rather than describing it. So I made this slide up. you have two fuels you can use in your body. One is glucose, which is sugar. And if you have any type of sugar, the complex carbohydrate or whether, ultimately it's metabolized down to glucose. Glucose is then broken down to pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon molecule, 2 pyruvates for 1 molecule of glucose. And then you have a fork there. So you can go one way to glycolysis, which is actually very useful when you're having a high intensity training, like what we were doing with the arm wrestling, or when you're sprinting or you're doing some type of activity like you're running a quarter, right? A quarter mile. That is totally anything over 100 meters would be a high intensity if you're running at full speed. But anyway, the pyruvate can go down into the acetyl-CoA, can be metabolized, or it can go to lactate. Now, this is important to know. And then when it goes to acetyl-CoA, it goes into the mitochondrial and electron transport chain. But you can also do free fatty acids, and they can also be metabolized. The same molecule, acetyl-CoA, it's called beta oxidation. And it's aerobic respiration because it uses oxygen in the mitochondria. Glycolysis, which occurs in the cytosol, does not use oxygen, but it's very inefficient. You only generate like 2 ATPs per molecule of glucose, whereas if it goes into the mitochondria, you're generating 36 to 38, and it generates lactate. Okay, really, really important. Now, some people call it lactic acid, but it's really lactate. And that's what causes the burn in your muscle, not because of lactic acid, but because it produces protons, which are acidic. So that gives you the quick energy. Now, when you do this normally, like we were doing in the arm wrestling contest, that is good and healthy. Now, I'm glad we started with this because there's 2 reasons why I think I was able to be victorious in that contest. One is because I was using the KAATSU, and I want you to understand the molecular biology of what's happening. This is normal and healthy. Thank God we have this system available, because if it wasn't, you could never run more than 100 meters. You just collapse and pass out because you'd be out of ATP. If you have to be able to use glycolysis, that pathway to generate the extra, and there's a cost for it, but it's a healthy cost. And when you're doing KAATSU, you are doing this consistently. You're activating those type 2 fibers, and when you activate it in this way, you are generating a wide variety of highly beneficial metabolic byproducts. One is IGF, insulin growth factor 1, which you may recall, or your viewers may know, that if that's elevated in your bloodstream, that's not a good idea. But if it's elevated locally in the muscle, which is what happens when you train the type 2 fibers, really good idea, because it's going to increase your muscle strength. The other thing that the KAATSU does is it increases a lot of other myokines, which are cytokines produced by the muscles. One would be VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. And the reason why that's so important, because it's like a fertilizer for your blood vessels. What I didn't finish talking about earlier is, as you age, the reason why it's really difficult to gain muscle mass, really difficult, is that your vascular supply, specifically the microvascular supply, the capillaries, decreases quite dramatically, typically as a result of lack of exercise. Because I've demonstrated that it doesn't have to decrease because you get older, because if you're doing the exercises, your body will continue to maintain its youthfulness. So when you do the KAATSU, you're generating this VEGF myokine, which acts as fertilizer for your blood growth. So you can increase the blood supply to your type 2 satellite stem cells, which causes them to continue to grow and work the way they were designed to. Now, it increases other beautiful things too, like BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is fertilizer for your brain, or makes you think better and think clearer. And it also, I'm sure you're familiar with the myostatin inhibitors. Perhaps your audience isn't. But they may have seen pictures of cows who had genetically knocked out the myostatin gene, so they essentially don't have myostatin. Now, myostatin inhibits muscle growth. And if you have an inhibitor of myostatin, that means you can grow muscle really well. Well, what KAATSU does, it inhibits myostatin, which is really, really good. And you don't have to take any drugs to do it. And it also increases growth hormone. So it's just a magical device. As I said, I've been using it for 6 years. I think it's really radically improved my type 2 muscle fibers in my upper arms. And that's because if you look at that video of us, you'll know that it was more than a minute. And typically after 10, 15 seconds at the most, but probably closer to 10, you have exhausted this bottom portion, the aerobic respiration of the mitochondria, the ability to produce energy. You have shifted to type 2 fibers.
That's
if your
what
type
got
2
me.
fibers aren't well trained and they haven't been used to it, you're going to exhaust. And if you look at that video again, you'll see you start to exhaust towards the end of it. Your energy, you're trying as hard as you can. The desire, the intensity, the brain input to your muscle was there, but it wasn't responding because it was out of fuel. It was simply out of fuel.
Absolutely. That's what I started to feel. I'm like, you know what? For a second, I was like, I'm gonna ride this out, and you know,
It would not
I'm
come
like,
back. You exhausted it. You totally exhausted it.
I said, you know what? And one thing, you know, just from the get-go, let's mention something. You and I, that was our first time on a professional arm wrestling table. Should have said,
Never did it
yeah,
before.
we were head toe to toe, and we both got quick instructions on different. We were playing around
From
with
a world-class professional
yeah,
on how to do it right. Because there's like 4 things that you have to, because the instructions we got now, that looked impressive. I could beat you, but I could probably beat someone that's twice your size, maybe 3 times your size. If he wasn't trained, he doesn't have that knowledge, because there's a lot of leverage and other ways and positioning that you do things, so that it gives you like Tyler had beat people that could bench press 600-700 pounds. I mean, they were monsters.
Yeah, that's crazy. If you know the technique.
Yeah, because if you have the technique, it's a big thing. But we both were on par with that. It was like one of us didn't have an unfair advantage.
He spent a few minutes with you, a few minutes with me, and then you know I came up to you. So just a little kind of disclaimer there. Now, being that we're here, and I'm kind of where this discussion is going, which is a little bit of, you know, biohacking your workout. You know, hey, I'm in my 60s or whatever phase you're in your life, and you you want to take your efforts in the gym, your efforts with your health, et cetera, like I've never done KAATSU, and why not try, right? Something I'm going to start doing. For example, I just purchased some of these machines, EWAT, right? Exercise with oxygen therapy, right? There's
better strategies than that, though. We can go into it if we have time. Because I started EWAT 10 years ago, but I gave it up about 6 or 7.
Okay. Wait, now I have to ask, because I'm actually vested in this one. So why is that?
Let's finish this first. I mean, I'm happy to go into it, but I want to finish. I don't want to get people. I want to finish this because there's more things to do.
Okay, fine. Right.
All right. So just remember, we'll go back to it.
Okay. So on as it relates to some of your habits and so forth of what you're doing to be able to you know exert this kind of force and strength at this age. Let me ask,
I think
though,
this is an important. Yeah, go ahead.
On supplementation, hormone therapy, etc. What else do you think can have contributed on a biochemical standpoint other than the KAATSU?
Well, I'm not doing anabolic steroids. That's for darn sure. I do some hormone replacement therapy, but it's very natural. It's pregnenolone, which is the master hormone, about 100 milligrams a day I take, and a very small amount of DHEA, 5 milligrams. And I do that transrectally I make them up myself, suppository, and I use cacao butter, which is a very long chain saturated fat, which facilitates direct absorption to the bloodstream so that you bypass liver metabolism and you get the real thing. Last thing you want to do is just swallow a tablet. You could swallow it if you had it with a teaspoon of butter or so, but if you just swallow a tablet like that, it's not a really good idea because you're only going to get about 10-15% absorption.
Okay. And then on nutrient therapy, vitamins, minerals, etc.
Okay, so that's what I want to go into. I think because I do think that is a good point. And how about the macronutrients like fat and carbohydrates, right? So let's go to the next slide. Yes. So have you ever heard of something called the Randle cycle?
No.
Okay. Well, it was discovered by Dr. Randle, imagine that, in 1963. And he realized that your mitochondria can only burn one fuel, not 2. So it cannot burn fats and glucose at the same time. It's either fats or glucose. And we've found out is that for most people, if you're taking greater than 30% fat, greater than 30%, remember the last slide I showed? Oops, that's the wrong one. Okay. The glycolysis, right? That's inefficient. Thank God we have it. And we described the case like the arm wrestling contest where I actually produced lactate because there wasn't enough oxygen in the muscle. I ran out of muscle and you ran out of muscle too. So you had to use that pathway. But you know what they call this? If you take glucose to lactate and there's plenty of oxygen, do you know what that's called? There's a name for it. And I'm sure you've heard of it, but you may not realize it. It's called the Warburg effect.
Mm.
Burn glucose and you put it through glycolysis and there's plenty of oxygen available and it's not going into the mitochondria, that is the Warburg effect. And probably you're aware that that's what happens in cancer. That's exactly what happens. So this is a very dangerous strategy.
So you don't again. The Warburg effect.
That's the Warburg effect. That is how cancer, most people who've even heard of the Warburg effect, they don't understand it. They really don't. They think that most people believe that cancer loves sugar.
Right.
Not true. No.
Oh, I heard you say this before. Okay. So it's based off of this. Okay.
Yeah. Cancer doesn't love sugar. It loves this pathway, this glycolysis pathway. And the reason it's going this way in most cancers is I'm going to show you, because this is more important than about EWOD. You got to get this pathway right, otherwise you're screwed up. And if you're going to glycolysis most of the day, as I say, most people are, it's going to radically increase your risk of cancer. And for those who don't know, I mean, cancer is in many age groups the #1 cause of death, and it's going fast. It's going to surpass cardiovascular disease in our lifetime. It will be #1. And I'll explain why. And there's one simple reason for that, and it's an industrially processed oil that almost all of us are eating, are in excess that we need to, and that contributes to this. But let me go back to the Randle cycle. So you ultimately want to burn your glucose in the mitochondria, unless you're doing high intensity exercise. Then thank God you got your type 2 fibers and you can do glycolysis, right? No, but that's the exception. That's not the rule. When you're resting, you want to use basically your mitochondria and burn glucose. I mean, there's some cells like your heart cells at night when they're resting, they can do beta oxidation and burn fat, and that's okay. It's not dangerous. It's just, but you want to primarily burn glucose in your mitochondria, which is the slide on the right. And the only way that you can do that is if your fat content is less than 30%. For this percentage of calories, total calories in your diet, 30%. Now, 97% of the population is metabolically inflexible, they're insulin resistant. And that, for those people, that percentage might be 20%, might even be as low as 10%. Not forever, but just until they're able to get that insulin resistance resolved. So they may benefit from a really low fat diet for a while, but it's really rare where almost anyone go benefit. Uncommon, put it this way, where you should be over 30% of your diet is fat. Now, unless you're part of the 97% that are metabolically inflexible, which is most of the population, then you can go on stuff that I've been promoting, like fat for fuel and intermittent fasting and regular fasting and a high fat diet. For many years, I was taking 70–80% of my diet as fat, and I was pretty healthy. Radically improved my health once I shifted, because I was insulin. %. And so most of the time, my mitochondria are using oxygen, not going into glycolysis. And why is this so important? On to the next step. Normally, this is an illustration of the mitochondrial membrane, and there's an inner and an outer membrane. Mm-hmm. And you can see these little squiggly tails inside the membrane. Those are fats or fatty acids, and that's the membrane is composed of fats. So, and embedded in the membrane are called complexes, and there's 5 of them in the mitochondria. And what happens is The electrons you eat in the form of fats or sugar are ultimately shuttled to these complexes, and they typically go forward. And when they go forward, the electrons are passed in a forward manner. You create very low reactive oxygen species. In other words, the whole system is 99.9% efficient, 99.9%, which is crazy good. That's about as good as it gets. Unfortunately, I would say less than 2%, 3% of the population is doing this. Maybe less than that, maybe less than 1%. And I'll tell you the primary reason, and part of the reason you wanted to do this, and the only reason you can do this is there's cofactors in those complexes, and I'm sure you've heard of one of them, NAD, and I'm sure you use it in your office. Yeah. NAD is one, FAD is another, which is a vitamin B2 derivative. NAD is vitamin B3, and then you've got coenzyme Q10 in there too, CoQ10, which is the Q, little circle in the middle, and those are all oxidized. The next slide will show you the difference between oxidized. So if they're reduced, you have a huge problem. The next slides will go over that. But essentially, the primary reason that contributes to this not working the right way, those fatty acids, those tails you see, if a significant amount of the fats in there are linoleic acid, which is the primary acid fat in omega-6 oils, seed oils, then it's going to be highly susceptible to oxidative damage, and that will screw things up, and you're going to go into reverse electron transfer, and I'll show that in a moment. So the fact that those cofactors are oxidized is huge. When it's reduced, the NAD goes to NADH, and the FAD to FADH. And that's no bueno. That's not good. So let me show you why it isn't good. Because you get reverse electron transfer. So instead of when the NAD is converted to NADH, and the coenzyme Q, this graph doesn't show it, but it gets converted to ubiquinol, then you have something called reverse electron transfer. And the electrons are going backwards in the mitochondria. And that is very inefficient. You get 3 to 4% reactive oxygen speeds instead of 0.1, so it's 30 to 40 times more ROS, which is probably the primary reason why we're having this epidemic of chronic degenerative diseases, because of this reverse electron transfer. It's foundational. It's also called reductive stress. It's virtually unknown in the community. I'm writing a review paper on this with some world-class people, and I hope to have the review paper out in a really good journal like Cell, Nature, maybe, or Science. And one of the co-authors is such a great research scientist. He probably can navigate it to be the cover story, like on Time magazine. So when that's available, that'll kind of go on all the details and cite all the scientific literature of this. But I think that's the foundation why most people are getting sick. And you really want to have your mitochondria burning sugar. Sugar is not evil. Sugar gets a bad rap. It's kind of like if you have a fire and the firemen show up to put it out. A lot of people would think, well, those damn firemen, they're there every time there's a fire. It's got to be the firemen that are causing the fire, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's correlation, is not causation. So it's the same thing with sugar. I mean, sugar gets a really bad rap. The thing is if you're eating glucose, sugar, carbohydrates, which almost everyone believes sugar is perniciously evil, and it's not. If you take too much of it, or you take processed sugar, it clearly is. Yeah. But if you have it in the right concentration, it's actually a health food. And I'm talking about sugar primarily in forms of whole foods like fruits. Okay, of course. Not dumpy. I mean, you even use natural sugars like honey or maple syrup. So that if you're metabolically healthy, that sugar will be metabolized in the mitochondria. And if it's shunted into glycolysis, and it's not burned in the mitochondria, then you build up the glucose, and the glucose has to go somewhere. So where does it go? It gets metabolized and turned into fat, but also leaks out back into the blood, and it raises your blood sugar. So it's sort of an artifact of dysfunctional mitochondria. It is not that you're eating too many carbohydrates. In fact, I was like on 100 grams of carbohydrates or so for many years. And then I went up to 500 grams over a few months. My average blood sugar dropped by 10 points.
Wow. Yeah, and that's
Body
why.
fat decreased by 3%. I was at 15%. I went down to 12.
Wow. Is that on a DEXA?
Something just as good as a DEXA is called an in-body, which is the best bioimpedance measurement. If you don't have one at your office, you might want to consider getting one. It's really, really good. It's about almost identical accuracy as the DEXA, and there's no radiation.
We use a DEXA, but yeah, the in-bodies are great. So
yeah, in-bodies are just, they're so much easier. You can use them. They're simpler. And most importantly, there's not ionizing radiation. DEXA is a lot of radiation. It really is.
Right.
I don't think I'll ever get one again. The in-body is more than sufficient.
That's true from that aspect on the radiation. But so here's the thing too on so speaking about mitochondria, I've read studies. I can't remember why I was reading this, but in regards to a while back, I was researching a peptide by the name of MOTC, and it was talking about how it upregulates GLUT4 receptors in the muscle, right? Which I was like, oh, what the heck? This thing.
You know what else? You know what cells regulates GLUT4 receptors and upregulates in muscle?
Which one?
Resistance training.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So, and I was like, wow, this is interesting. And anyways, I won't get into the deep dive I took down that rabbit hole, but ultimately, they were on the article I was reading was connecting the Okinawan in Japan that lived a long period of time, supposedly one of the blue zones on planet Earth, and with higher levels of MOTC in their blood, thus promoting more mitochondrial biogenesis, and consequently attributing them to living longer and having a better processing of sugars and so forth in in their metabolic.
That's why building muscle mass is so important, because it is a massive glucose sink. So it's very unusual to find a really big muscle guy, a bodybuilder, that's diabetic. It really is, because their muscles are massive glucose sinks. They almost can't eat too many carbs. I'm sure there are diabetics, but it's unusual in a
Absolutely.
bodybuilder.
Yeah, I am one that, for my height, I have a pretty high height to muscle
BMI?
ratio. Well, just my on the DEXA, there's actually this little marker on height to muscle, and I do feel it. If I don't have a certain amount of carbs on my day to day, I do start to feel tired, especially if it's a day in the office. I'm pushing, but the girls know. They're like they start to say he needs to eat, because I start to like shut off.
Yeah. Do you know what happens?
Well,
Wait, so you only have a limited supply of glucose, right? Glycogen. And if you've worked out that day and you didn't eat, you can easily exhaust your glucose stores. But it's about 1,500 grams if you're healthy. If you have liver damage, like 70% of the population, you maybe can store 400 or 500 grams. Because most of the glucose or glycogen is stored in the liver. You have some in your muscle, but the one in your muscle is only used in the muscle. It's not shuttled into the blood. The only way you get sugar into your blood is from your liver glycogen. So that's why it's important to have a healthy liver. But once your glucose levels go down, your body needs glucose. Yes, your brain can use lactate. It can use ketones. You can probably do 70, 80% of your fuel supply in your brain with those. But you absolutely have to have glucose. And if you don't get it, you're going to hypoglycemic coma and you will die. Now, fortunately, that is rarely ever happens, because your body has backup mechanisms, and it's called a hormone, which is, and you should appreciate this, it's the major aging hormone. It is the hormone that will age your body prematurely the fastest. Do you know what that hormone is?
Talking about mTOR?
No, mTOR is not a hormone. mTOR is a metabolic pathway. It's in the muscle. So the hormone is cortisol.
Oh, yes.
And it's called a glucocorticoid. And why would they call cortisol a glucocorticoid? Because its primary function, the sole primary purpose of cortisol, is to raise your blood sugar so you don't die from hypoglycemia. That's what it's supposed to do. Now, it has other functions, but that's its primary function. And so you say, well, how does cortisol raise my blood sugar? How does that work? Well, it doesn't create glucose out of thin air. It takes fuel primarily amino acids, and it basically shreds your muscles, your bone, your brain, and your other organs, sucks the amino acids out of those and shuttles them to the liver, and your liver makes glucose in a process called gluconeogenesis and raises your blood sugar. That's why you can fast, for a day or two. And most people, after the second or third day of their fast, their blood sugar starts to rise. It's because of cortisol. I mean, the first day or two is really low, and then it just shoots up, even though they haven't had anything to eat, nothing. And their blood sugar's through the roof. That's because they would be dead if their cortisol didn't kick in. So thank God that exists, because that's exactly what happens when you're sprinting and things, is that the cortisol goes up, but it's short term. But if you're doing this continuously, as you do with keto or chronic fasting or OMAD, 1 meal a day, you're asking for trouble. You're actually accelerating the aging process. You're not decelerating, you are accelerating it. So this is why you have to be ultra cautious and really provide your body, your mitochondria specifically, with the fuel source it needs to continuously have a decent level of blood sugar. And your self-regulatory processes will be optimized, and the ability to produce energy. And typically that is reflected in thyroid function, because the thyroid is what gets, if you start going low calorie and not enough sugar, you can definitely disrupt your thyroid function, and you need thyroid hormone. And I would say maybe half the people in the country, their thyroid is not working great. That's why going on a low calorie diet for long term is a really, really bad idea, really bad, because you're going to screw up your thyroid big time. And then you got to take thyroid hormones and hopefully get it recovered. And sometimes it's really hard to get it recovered once you've trashed it,
Right. And so what do we say to people? For example, there's this whole, keto diet, carnivore, etc. This whole aversion to sugar, aversion to carbs. And mind you, for the people out there, we're not talking about eating processed sugars and so forth. We're talking about whole foods and getting carbohydrates from good sources. All right. So,
yeah.
But so and there's this whole thing. Fruits are bad, veggies are bad. You hear all these different kinds of things. So,
fruits, vegetables can be bad. It depends on the person, but some of them are problematic. Certainly seeds and nuts, because they're high in omega-6. So you have to be really, really careful. The only nut that's not high would be macadamia nuts, but they're still high. You don't want a lot of them at all. I mean, it's not that you can never have an almond, but an almond is really, really high in omega-6, and it's full of oxalate. So if you have 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 almonds, it's not going to wreck your health. But if you have almond milk and almond butter and have massive sources of almonds in your diet, it's not a good strategy. It's definitely going to.
I always say people with the almond milk, even with the almond milk, the way it's made nowadays, with all the gum gores and carrageenans and so forth, I'm like,
bad news.
Yeah, I'm like, that's leaky gut all the way.
Yeah, so a lot of these other ostensibly healthy carbohydrates, like grains, my first book that I wrote in 2004, which is almost 20 years ago now, New York Times bestseller, actually.
I remember that book.
Was the no grain diet. No grain diet. So I still believe that avoiding most grains is a good idea. Now, there are some grains that are okay, and some grains I actually have every day. And what do you think the healthiest grain is from my perspective? The most acceptable grain that's not going to harm you?
Barley?
That's actually what I feed my chickens. No, but for humans, I wouldn't have barley personally. I feed my chickens barley. I feed them field peas, and I sprout them, and I cook them in an Instapot, so they get fed really well. I give them niacinamide and methylene blue and aspirin, a lot of cool stuff. But anyway, the best grain for humans would be white rice. White rice. So I can have I'm maybe 3/4 pound of white rice a day. That's the only grain I eat, and I'll have white potatoes as another one. But most other starchy carbs are not that great. You have to be careful. I mean, even sweet potatoes, ostensibly healthier because of the beta carotenes, but it's pretty loaded with oxalates. So you have to be cautious. And oxalates you can tolerate them, especially if your microbiome is healthy, you can metabolize them. But oxalates radically increase your risk of developing kidney stones, which are usually calcium oxalate. So you have to be really careful. And it can cause a lot of other problems. Sally Norton's actually written a book on this, which goes into great deal. I've interviewed a few times. But speaking of resources, I had a paper published a few weeks ago in Nutrients, which is a pretty high impact nutrition journal, probably one of the highest. And you can go to my Substack, which is Take Control. So, or just go to substack.com, type in Take Control or Dr. Mercola or both. And then once you get to my Substack, there's right at the homepage, there's a linoleic acid image. You can just click on it. And I did a 30-minute video that took me 6 months to create, because at the time I did the video, I was just frustrated. I couldn't find anyone to co-write the paper with me, and I needed someone to help navigate the minefield of the peer reviewers. So I did. Also ultimately did find someone, and we were able to get it published, because peer review is a challenge, just to be kind. Yeah. So we had three rounds of peer review before he got accepted, because some of them are just the biggest knuckleheads. They just don't get things. But you have to be political and diplomatic to kind of navigate through that. So we got it, and it's published. So it goes into a lot of details in the conserves, because lowering your linoleic acid, we're not going to have time to discuss it now, but that's probably the single most important strategy you can do to improve your health overall. And it does it primarily through the process of reducing reductive stress in the mitochondria. The other thing, while you're on the Substack site, you can just type in KAATSU, KAATSU. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you just go to substack.com and type it in, my article will come up first. And I did another really good video. It's almost 30 minutes. And then I think a 30 or 40 page article that will go into much greater detail than I did just earlier, explaining the KAATSU. And plus there's a link in there where you can get the 10% off of the KAATSU, because $1,000 is not cheap. So to get $100 off would be a good deal. And I use KAATSU. It's very, very rare where I don't use it every day. Mm-hmm. I didn't use it at all when I was at Orlando Biohacking event, or I traveled 2 days ago traveled flu. So if I'm traveling, I typically don't. But if I'm at home, I pretty much do it every day. And sometimes for 2 or 3 hours. Like if I work out, it's like 2 hours, I do it on my arms, and I walk on the beach for an hour a day at the shore, so wherever the ocean's lapping up, and at solar noon, which is about 12:30 to 1:30 in the summer, and I'm wearing my KAATSU.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so because so you can get the benefit, because it works out your leg muscles too. Now on the linoleic.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I wanted to ask you something on linoleic acid.
Sure, go ahead.
Because the high source of linoleic acid is chicken, correct? You would say?
The highest source in the United States diet is chicken, and that's because chicken are monogastric animals, meaning they don't have multiple chambers in their stomach. And the ruminant animals that do have multiple chambers, what resides in there are bacteria, and these bacteria that are resident there have the ability to saturate the polyunsaturated fats like omega-6 and linoleic acid, so they make them a saturated fat or a monounsaturated fat, so they're less dangerous. That's why cow, sheep, lamb, goats, buffalo, those are all ruminant animals, and that meat and their fat is healthy to eat. Non-ruminant animals, like the biggest two in the U.S., would be chicken and pork. So you can raise them to be healthy. Ancestrally, more than 150 years ago, they were pretty much all healthy. But chicken wasn't a popular food until like the early 1900s. I mean, it was kind of, if you read I read a book where someone reviewed the history of it. It was pretty much, I mean, chickens used to be really scrawny and small. They were not very big at all. It was not much meat on them. So they were not consumed. They were not the staple they are now at all. So, but if you did have a chicken back then, it would probably not have a lot of linoleic acid.
I think we're hitting the hour too. That we've been chatting about all this cool stuff, and today we had the opportunity to hear Dr. Mercola, and I don't want to risk the audio. Make sure last thing we want to do is have it flop here towards the end. But look, we spoke about so many cool things. I mean, so many little pearls and strategies were dropped here, all the way from macadamia nuts. Maybe those are the best nuts, and
Yeah, it doesn't mean you want to eat a pound of macadamia nuts a day either.
right, right.
Everything in moderation, right?
Yeah, the white rice got me because I'm a big black rice guy, and I've
Oh, no. You definitely want white rice because it's actually the fiber that presents some of the problems because, and I neglected to mention that fiber that you don't digest can sometimes, especially depends on your microbiome, it can go into the intestine and you're not breaking it down, but the bacteria in your intestine break it down. And if the gram negatives break it down, they reproduce dye, and embedded in their cell membrane is a substance called lipopolysaccharide, LPS for short, but it's also called endotoxin. And endotoxin is highly inflammatory. It can bust holes in your gut, cause leaky gut, increases inflammation. It can even lead to septic shock, but it definitely decreases your health. So that's one of the complications of eating foods like black rice and others, is that you potentially providing fibers or fuel for those gram negatives to produce endotoxin.
Wow, that's such a good pearl there. And I love white rice. My mom's Brazilian. These people eat rice like crazy. Yeah,
Perfect.
they love white rice.
Yeah.
So many pearls here on the KAATSU and just different hormone therapy strategies. So many, wow, just like kind of rewinding here about all the cool stuff we spoke about today and had the opportunity to hear Dr. Mercola share with us. And listen, we started doing this podcast today, our webinar, because of a interesting event that occurred with us two kind of joking around, and it got us both thinking. And Dr. McCall sent me an email and he's like, hey, why don't we do a podcast explaining how that's possible? And I was like, you know what, this makes sense. And just the main point, taking a bird's eye view from this whole thing, it doesn't matter the stage you're in your life, because sometimes I talk to people, oh, I'm too old for this, or no, you just heard Dr. McCall say he put 20 pounds of muscle in 60 years old plus, right? So don't put that roadblock for yourself. Don't put that limiting belief for yourself. It is possible with the proper strategies. And that's what we discussed here today. We discussed some really cool biochemical strategies, training strategies. I'm going to try this KAATSU thing myself. I'll shoot you an email later and let you know how that's going for me. I am going to bug you on that EWOT though later. You're going to have to tell me why you gave it up, please. But so get at it. Don't put age as a block. Don't put anything as a block. Don't put any limiting beliefs as a block. Get smart about things. The biggest thing you could do for yourself is get informed. When you get information, you take control of your life. Two things take you out of control in your life. Not having information makes people scared, being scared. When you have information, you take back control of your life. So I hope you guys got some really good information today, because information is empowering, and we got it from the best of the best, Dr. McCall. So thank you for being with us today. Always appreciate you. And maybe we should try this again. Let me do some KAATSU and so forth, and we'll go back at it.
Let me know if you have questions, because it's a very powerful intervention. Now, because of your age and your fitness level, you really don't need it. I mean, you don't, but it will decrease your risk of injuries. But I would still do both. I would do regular conventional training, but after 40, certainly after 50, you really want to shift to that as your primary form. Doesn't mean you can't use any of hard, because twice a week I'll do heavy lifting with conventional weight.
I know you could put up a bunch of weight. Where did I see this? Or did you tell me?
I've done a 600-pound leg press, 650 actually, and 400-pound deadlift at 68.
Yeah. So impressive.
But it's too risky, and if your biomechanics aren't right, you can definitely get hurt. No question.
No.
A lot of people get hurt.
Look, this morning, if anybody would have seen me, they're like, oh, he's lifting girl weights. But I was with my trainer that's like super hyper correcting me on the form and so forth, because I don't want to have the injuries, And I lifted so hard right after I went to jiu-jitsu, and both my legs cramped up after my fourth fight. And I was like, I can't. I still had 2 more to go. So, and not going heavy on the weights, because my musculoskeletal system, I do not need it breaking down at all, so.
Yeah, one of the other things too, if you do, I don't know if you ever get DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness in your lower body and primarily your legs, but typically after the leg hour, it's real common for many people where you can't even sit down the next day because you're so sore, like glutes. So one of the ways that you can abort that is you could take some aspirin, which would really help. Aspirin is not the nefarious evil.
I just do sodium bicarb.
Sodium bicarb is really good too. Yeah, you could definitely take that. You know, one of the better ways to take bicarb is in orange juice. Take a glass of orange juice, put a teaspoon of bicarb, baking soda,
right,
and then stir it around. Just make sure that it's not all the way filled to the top because it forms as bubbles and foam that will go overflow the glass. But yeah, you can do that. I do that before my workout and after my workout, or sauna, for sure.
That's
but then
such
sauna
a good
after your workout will help too. That'll decrease stones. But the baking soda is a really good strategy. Really good.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's illegal. It's illegal in horse racing.
Really?
Yeah, you find out the horse is disqualified if they give them bacon. Then if they do that because it works, it's effective. It radically improves the performance. Otherwise, why would they do it?
Yeah, I have athletes ask me that all the time, and it's not on any USADA guidelines or anything like that.
No, it's not. If they can check for it in horses, I'm sure they could do it in humans too. But it's definitely good because it keeps your body more alkaline, which is great. And actually, what happens too is it actually increases your carbon dioxide levels. That's something you want to do. That's why you want to wear glucose in your mitochondria, because the end byproduct of glucose metabolism, it takes two things. It makes deuterium-free metabolic water, and will make carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is good. The more carbon dioxide you get, the better typically, because there's a Bohr effect. The carbon dioxide actually displaces oxygen from the human. You actually increase your oxygen concentration when you increase CO2. Because if you measure your PO2 level with a pulse oximeter, and you've just taken that baking soda, you should try this. I will guarantee you could be at like 99, and then your PO2 will drop to like 95.
No way.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, because the CO2 is going up, which is a good thing. That's powerfully beneficial. Yeah.
That's acid.
I love baking soda.
Yeah, and then for you people out there, just kind of wrapping your head around this, I always like to tell people, when you go to a supermarket, you see all this alkaline water, this and alkaline. That alkaline's like a bit, we're talking about getting rid of all this acid. And even I know naturopathic doctors and so forth that treat cancers with more from a more holistic point of view. And I was talking to one the other day. He does sodium bicarb tablets like 4 times a day with his cancer patients to get rid, and then throws them in a hyperbaric and all this stuff to help get rid of the acidity, the lactic acid and the acidity produced by the cancer. So call it wherever it's coming from. The human body doesn't like acid too much. So anyways, another.
But the way to treat that more functionally, I mean, he's treating it with symptoms, and that's beneficial. But that's why I show those slides. That lactate, it's actually more correctly biochemically is lactate. It's not lactic acid, because that's what it is in the chemical in the body. But it's being produced because you're using glycolysis, which is the Warburg effect. So you want to change your macro distribution so you're burning glucose in your mitochondria, not in glycolysis, so that you're not generating lactate to begin with. That's the key. You've got to reduce that reductive stress. And we didn't talk about this, but there's 2 massive nutrients. I can't believe I didn't mention this. The other 2 reasons, I take things that will reduce reductive stress. Now, the most important thing you can do is reduce linoleic acid, but the other 2 simple things you can do is use a vitamin B3 form called niacinamide, not niacin, niacinamide. You take a very tiny dose. That is the root molecule in NAD. And niacinamide is a fuel that the rate-limiting enzyme, NAMPT, to make NAD requires to make NAD. So you give it 50 milligrams, not 500, because you can get, that's the only one that's made out there is like 500 milligrams, although we're looking at, well, I think we'll have it next week, is a 50 milligram tablet you can take 3 times a day. 50 milligrams only, no more, 3 times a day. And then you could also take something, so that makes more NAD in your body by giving the fuel to NAMPT. Exercise will increase it too, it increases NAMPT. But then you can reduce the NADH, you can oxidize that with a substance called methylene blue.
Right.
Actually, I have a whole article on methylene blue on my Substack site too. And you just don't need much. It's like 10 milligrams. That's it, 10 milligrams once a day. And it shouldn't be enough to turn your urine blue even. And that will oxidize the NADH to NAD, and your energy level will go through the roof, your performance will go up, And it's an amazing combination. And that addresses the reductive stress that causes the cancer. And that was a tangent from why treat the symptoms with hyperbaric and baking soda. Not that you shouldn't use those, but why not go deeper and treat the fundamental cause of the problem, which is reductive stress in the mitochondria?
Absolutely. I actually take 10 milligrams of NAD. What's the time you would say to take, not NAD,
NAD or methylene blue?
Sorry, methylene blue.
Methylene blue.
What would be the, sometimes I can't get the time right on that stuff. Could try to take it end of the day, but probably.
It doesn't matter on time. You can take it any day you want. If you're going to want to optimize it, though, I would suggest taking it by 20, 30 minutes before an infrared or near infrared light exposure. So that would be your sauna or sunlight, because there's a synergetic impact when you have near infrared in cytochrome C oxidase or complex 4 that helps dissociate the nitric oxide that's complex there, and it's slowing down and it's making complex 4 sluggish. So when you add infrared light and methylene blue, it's like boom, and off to the races, and your ATP production typically goes up by 30%. And ATP is energy. So it's good news.
Wow.
See, that's why I had that energy and that I could go continuously. My cofactors and my mitochondria were optimized, and I trained my type 2 fibers to do that so I could go. I didn't run out of fuel.
I thought you were going to run out. I'm like, oh my God. And then I just started to go. I'm like, just super tired. Made sense.
It's understanding the physiological molecular biology at the fundamental level. Once you understand that, you can optimize.
Hey, I got to finish off with this. You know what I'm going to say?
Yeah.
You want to know how to get old man strength? Watch this podcast. There you go. That's how you get the, how they say old man strength. Grandpa was really strong and so forth. There you go. These are the secrets. These are the secrets that Grandpa never told you. Revealed today.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share this, because I was really intrigued. I try every year. I try to have some demonstration to myself and publicly that I'm doing the right things, and this is the one for 2023. So thanks. I mean, in the past it was 600-pound leg presses, 400-pound deadlifts, but this arm wrestling contest was one for 2023 . So
no,
I really appreciate it. I don't know what I'm going to do next year, but I'll have to figure something out.
Hey, if it's something kind of crazy, you need a partner, give me a call.
Okay, sounds good.
But look, Nan, thank you for actually that makes me very happy and proud and grateful to be part of your challenge this year for 2023. Started off as a joke, and here we are now.
No,
so,
it was really one of the highlights. It was, I was not anticipating to beat you. I really wasn't, but I thought it was worth a try, and I said, okay, I'll try it. But, it was really good. And it was really the highlight of the event for me, just to be able to do that. And I would surprise myself. So.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mercola. Right. Again, such a pleasure.
Thanks, Dr. D.
I'll see you on the next one.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks so much for watching. Remember, hit the like and subscribe button so you can get more videos that can help you and your family take control of your health.